Screenwriters need a festival because I think screenwriting is obviously the bedrock of the film. It's the most important thing that you're going to have to work from. As they always say, if it ain't on the page, it's very rarely going to be on the screen. But yes, screenplays are blueprints for movies, but they have to be pretty solidly locked down blueprints. So I think anything which actually celebrates writing, gives writers the opportunity to be completely involved, to be able to express themselves, more significantly to meet in sufficient numbers where they feel that there's an engagement of ideas and thoughts and so on. It's a very lonely business often being a screenwriter, that many people labour away on their own, and obviously they get involved at a certain point where the producer or the director gets involved and takes the thing further forward, but a lot of the time writers work on their own. And I've run many screenwriting courses where I discovered very early on that the most important thing, far more than having mentoring and people working alongside you that were kind of like advising you about scripts and so on, one of the biggest things that came out of them was just simply the support system of being with people who are fellow practitioners of your craft. So the idea of a festival of this kind seems to me absolutely fantastic, because it's an opportunity for writers to gather as a group, to be able to swap war stories, exchange ideas, and really feel that they're somehow generating a sense of community. And in that way, in my experience, that inspires the work to a much higher degree. The problem in the UK is always that you learn writing by doing it. I mean, it's like something you can have, that I've run, as I say, I've run many screenwriting courses myself, and I agree with the assessment of many writers that I bring on, top-level writers who've been brought on to work on those courses, that their view is you could teach the rudiments of screenwriting in a morning. The question is, do you have a voice? Do you have something very specific to say? And the best way of expressing that is obviously to start writing. You can write on spec, but you can't write in a vacuum indefinitely. And one of the problems is that the level of production is such that whereas in the United States, say, or in France or continental Europe, which has greater levels of subsidy for filmmaking, the chances of getting a film made are somewhat smaller. So therefore, the state of screenwriting in the UK perhaps reflects to a degree the fact that people don't always have the opportunity to work in that way. However, having said that, there are really wonderful writers working out of the UK. There's a lot of people coming out of theatre still and out of TV, and TV is obviously the best place for them to have the opportunity to cultivate and develop their skills further. There are novelists who are getting into making films and who are able to kind of work in the medium in a different way. My view is that I wish sometimes that it could be a bit more challenging and people would challenge themselves a bit more, but it is hard to do without the vacuum. Now, the one thing I would say is the thing that's changing everything is that digital media is changing things dramatically. That whereas it was an impossible idea that you would be able to make a film and put something together that would be reasonably showable to people for, you know, kind of anything less than about £1 million. That was inconceivable probably even like 5 years ago or whatever. It is now entirely possible for people to put films together on very, very tiny budgets. I mean, I think impressive films like London to Brighton, I believe, was made for about £80,000. And that really opens things up in a much bigger way. There is less of an excuse for writers to say, I can't get my film made or whatever. Now there is a much bigger opportunity that if you come up with an interesting idea, that you can get it made. What it does mean is that you have to kind of then work towards what the limitations of the medium are, which in that case, if you're trying to make it low budget, you're not going to be able to write huge epic Dr. Zhivago style riot scenes or whatever. It's going to have to be human drama on a more limited scale, but that is the most challenging stuff in many cases to write. And indeed many of the films that I love personally, my favourite films, are often very limited films. A film like Polanski's Knife in the Water, which is 3 people on a boat for 90 minutes, and it's totally compelling. So the challenges of the medium also give you great opportunities as a writer to develop your craft. But the biggest thing of all is to kind of develop voices. And it's not an accident that the people get excited about are people who are establishing a particular voice or a flavour or whatever. Mark O'Halloran, who was just speaking inside, he wrote this film Garage for Lenny Abrahamson, has a very distinctive voice as a writer. somebody like a Martin McDonagh, who's just made his first feature film in Bruges, as a playwright has an incredibly distinctive voice, which his short film Six Shooter showed that he could translate into film, and the script of In Bruges demonstrates as well. And again, it's a small film. It's basically a four-hander, effectively. It's essentially a two-hander. So voice is the most important thing. The great thing about the festival is that there are people there that have these strong voices who are talking to people, sharing their experiences, talking through workshops or whatever, and encouraging people to get that voice out there. And that's what I feel is the most important thing. You know, if you're in continental Europe, the director is everything. He's the auteurist theory dominates absolutely everything. If you're in the UK, to a large degree, writers have a higher profile because they've always had a higher profile through theatre and television. When it comes, the minute they move into film, people generally tend to gravitate towards the directors or whatever. But you look at certain people in the UK at the moment. Pete Morgan is having an incredible time at the moment because he's writing film and theatre. I mean, Frost Nixon was a huge success. He wrote The Queen, he's done The Other Berlin Girl. That he's getting a profile where when people write about the films, they're writing about Pete as much as anything else. So I think a number of people have kind of like stamped a firm identity and have cultivated themselves to a position where there is more recognition. But in film, it's always going to be a collaborative medium. You're always going to have to share that kind of that sense. There are a handful of superstar writers, but they're always going to have to fight and jockey a little bit for position.
But it does go back to what you were saying about voice and finding a voice and making
if you have a voice and that you have something distinctive. When you know Buñuel was working on his French movies, he collaborated a lot with Jean-Claude Carrier, and they had a very distinctive flavour in their films together, and Carrier had a very distinctive voice as a writer. When Polanski was working with Gerard Brasch when he was still alive, that they had, again, their collaboration was very distinctive and very strong, and Brasch's screenplays kind of had that distinctive voice to them. But that's what it comes down to in the end, is can you do something beyond? Most people could, within a day, could construct a 3-act piece that would be perfectly serviceable. The question is, can you take that and elevate it into something different? And that comes down in the end to expressing yourself through having a particular voice.